I took the time to put these pictures together, and as I was sharing with somebody just a moment ago, that was no small thing. To put all the photos together. I just threw a quick preview at Focus Sunday. But yeah, it's going to be neat to kind of share the trip and have you go along with us. And for those of you who've been, this will be reminiscent, I think, in many ways. So Wayne, if we could kill at least maybe that light there. And, yeah, this should work. This should work. Yeah. All right. Let's be off and running here, and I'll just kind of do that like we do. Okay. On my screen, the map was bigger. Hopefully, the slides will be bigger than that. Just out of curiosity, go to the next slide. I'm wondering if it'll display. Okay, that's pretty good display. So, and this is supposed to have a little laser pointer on it. Let's see if it works as such. Boom, there we go. Okay. So we landed in Tel Aviv, and again, on my computer, this was bigger, but that's good. Yeah, that worked.
Third one.
Okay, cool. Tel Aviv is where we live.
Which one do you? That's one.
Now you're playing. Am I forward? Okay, there we go. Good. So Tel Aviv is where we landed, and then the first place that we visited right away. Man, Rob had us doing stuff. We hit the ground running. After I don't know how long of a trip over there, time has no meaning. You know, you just sort of quit looking at your watch and you know, keep your vitamin C going. But yeah, we landed in Tel Aviv, and then ground transportation took us right away just north of Tel Aviv to Jaffa, or Jaffa as it's also called, and that's where we are on the coast. Next slide. So this is Jaffa, and really beautiful little seaside, Mediterranean seaside town. And this in particular was the site of, next slide, the house of Simon the Tanner, if you know your book of Acts. And it surely has been renovated some over the years. I don't really think this is exactly as it existed 2,000 years ago. But that is the site of the house. And in the story of Acts, that's the house where Peter was on the roof, and God gave him the vision of, you know, that no longer were the Gentiles unclean. And then he sent him from there to Cornelius and his family. So it's pretty neat being on that spot in that location, and you can see right there behind the house in the distance, if you can, that's the Mediterranean Sea. It was dusk, so the light's a little bit hazy. But did I hear a question or something?
How big is that house?
Yeah, I'm not good at, you know, guessing things, but if you were standing here, you know, that's the front door. Okay, so you know, you got about a bedroom that way and a living room that way. And,
hey, Kim?
yes.
When we were there, we went down in a low alleyway to an old door, almost basically underground,
Yeah.
below the level of the street.
Well, that was probably more accurate because this is well above. You know, they
Right.
build stuff on top of stuff on top of
Build
stuff
on
top of
top.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. They do. There's over the years, there's layers of building on top of sites and things. Site, but not exactly the house. One of the things that we learned and encountered, and if you've been there, you encountered and learned this too, that a lot of times when they're showing you a site of something biblical, it's either contested somewhat between Catholics, Orthodox Christians, and Muslims, or it's the location. But as Chrissy just said, because they've had different overlords over the years, you know, depending on who was in power, they would build over top of what was there, you know. So it's like the site, but maybe not necessarily the same building or room. Next. We then went just up the coast a little bit to Caesarea, and this was one of my personal favorite places that we went. Go ahead. we are entering here a big amphitheater, and this amphitheater is interesting because they've restored it, and today it's a working amphitheater. It's a Roman ruin from the time of Herod. Herod was an incredible builder, maybe not the greatest guy, but an amazing builder. And so many of the Roman ruins today go back to his projects and his building. This entrance we're going through has a funny name, you know, for the Roman buildings. Anybody know what the entrances into the amphitheater or exits are referred to as? What's the word, Chrissy? It is the vomitorium, which apparently is because, as you know, it's over, that's what spews the people out of the arena. So you learn something new every day. Next slide. We've walked in now, and as you can see, it's pretty cool in that they've taken this ancient amphitheater, restored it, and it's an actual working concert venue. I don't know who was playing there that night. Probably no one I've ever heard of, you know, but great, go ahead. Rob is teaching us here. You know, anytime we were somewhere that there was something to learn, we would just sit down, and he would always be teaching us, sharing a little bit from Scripture about where we were. So we were connecting the biblical significance of where we were, and then a lot of times he'd have an insight or an anecdote that's based on that Scripture that was really great. So there he is teaching us as he did so many times. Next.
Did you notice if people that weren't part of the group, would they stop and listen or anything?
No, not necessarily, because there were so many touring groups.
Oh, okay.
In 2 years of COVID, there was a backlog of touring groups like ours. Our group was supposed to have been like a year before. So I guess it's always crowded at many of these sites, but it was sort of uber crowded because of just the backlog of touring groups that now we're getting a chance to go. Once Israel lifted certain restrictions and things, and just a better time now, so we were able to do it. This is still in Caesarea. You can see how it's right on the Mediterranean Sea, and these are the ruins of, again, part of Herod's palace. This was Herod's pool. This, you know, that's where he did laps, I guess. You know, backstroke. And kind of folks out there, they're just fishing, you know. So folks that live in the area, you know, that's their fishing spot. Just right there on the ruins of Herod's palace. You know, the old world meeting the new, I suppose. Kind of cool. Next one. And yeah, Chrissy and me just getting a picture in with that in the background.
Not illegal.
Right.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
So what's on the left side? It looks like a mound or something.
Yeah, it's just like a little bit of a ruin, you know. And kind of a rock pile. Next. Okay, there's just all kinds of little ruins and stones and things. This one I thought was interesting. Anybody see a name engraved on that you might recognize?
Abraham? No. I don't know.
Well, it starts with the letter P.
Plato. P-L-A-T-E-V.
Yeah, it's a little not totally clear. Pilate is what's
I
written
don't know,
down there.
there's an I.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Pontius Pilate referred to there on that stele. Kind of cool. You know, I said it Sunday, but one of the neat things you realize is you see these ruins, and there's always excavation ongoing. The archaeologists are still always excavating. Almost everywhere we went, there was, you know, dig sites that were active and things. And as they unearth stuff, it just always syncs with what the Bible's been telling us all along, you know, which is wonderful. That the archaeological record, you know, they find out what God's been telling us for 2,000 years and way before that. So I love that. Thanks.
Is that in Caesarea?
Yes.
The pot, the reference to pot?
Yes. That's correct. Yeah. There's more of the Roman ruins. And I want to show you the next slide after this one because this is something I thought was pretty cool. Go ahead. Anybody guess what this is where I'm standing? Might not be obvious. Yeah, good. It's the Hippodrome, which was the NASCAR of,
Yeah, chariot races.
yeah, chariot races. Amazing, right? So you got like the grandstands here, and I'm down on one end. They'd get around this corner, go down the straightaway, way down there, and then come back around. I was just imagining, I like to just soak in a moment when I'm somewhere, and it was easy to imagine the spectacle of it all, right? Next. Rob likes to do more than imagine. So. Yeah. Much as he'd prod them on, those horses didn't go anywhere. Though, so they were a little stiff. Next. Really fascinating. Our Jewish tour guide, Kari, she was wonderful. She told us so many times, remember, what do you need for life?
Yeah.
She would say, what do you need for life? And what's the first thing she would say?
Water.
Yeah. Water. Because we're in the desert or we're in very arid places. And so the Romans, were so highly developed. And they had these elaborate aqueduct systems transferring water from freshwater sources, miles and miles and miles to the cities and towns that Herod would build. And the remains of this aqueduct we thought were pretty fascinating. Next. I'm showing this just to say that if you haven't been and you're ever worried about if you'll eat well, don't worry. You'll eat very well. There's no bacon, warning.
Boy, did you miss it.
In fact, when I got home, first thing I did was went and got barbecue. And then right after that I got chips and guac to bring balance back to the food. But the food's so fresh. They grow so much there, vegetables and fruits and all kinds of things. It was great. That's, of course, some of you may know, Jim Laughlin, my brother-in-law. Next slide. He's married to Chrissy's sister, Lisa, and it was really fun for us not just to get to share this experience with Hutch and Rocks, of course, but with Jim and Lisa as well, with our family being there was so special. Yeah. All right, now we're moving up the coast even more, and you can see Mount Carmel there. This is where we are, and when you're on top of Mount Carmel, to the one side, on a day that's not hazy, the weather was a little hazy when they're there, but you can see the Mediterranean pretty easily if the weather's clear. If you look the other side, it looks down upon the valley of Megiddo, the site of what will one day be Armageddon. So that, is one of those moments that feels very significant when you're up there. Next slide. So from the top of Mount Carmel, Rob is, sharing with us the significance of this place. And I was asked to read the story, as I mentioned Sunday, of Elijah taking on the 450 prophets of Baal in the book of Kings, and how remarkable of a moment that was. Elijah being the only man in Israel who was faithful to the Lord, northern kingdom. And, he was so locked into the Lord that he knew from the Lord that he could have staged this contest, if you will, and tell these 450 prophets of Baal, you guys set up an altar to your God, I'll set up an altar to my God, and the God will both pray, and the God who answers with fire is the true God. And of course, we know what happened with the prophets of Baal. They were praying to nobody, and nothing happened. And then the Lord not only torched the sacrifice, but he torched the altar and everything around it. Just an amazing, amazing, testimony and victory for the Lord that day. And Elijah's faithfulness as God's prophet. And, Rob would always have something for us, not only telling the story, but applying it and getting us to think. It was great. Next. From that place where he taught us, then you can go up to kind of an observation deck, and behind us there is the valley of Megiddo. Again, a little hazy, but you can see it down there. If you were to look down at our feet, you would see this. Next slide. So, even if it was completely fogged in, you would know which way Megiddo was. Yeah. Next. put this up because we were always told ahead of time there were certain places that we would visit where they would tell, the tour guide would say, now, this is a holy place that you're going. And what that means is that you're to approach it with more reverence and be more conservative. Women had to cover their shoulders and, wear like dresses, or longer things. It's a little funny. Whoops, let's go back.
Sorry.
It's all right. Go back. I don't know. We jumped a bit here. You got an itchy trigger finger back there.
I know. All right, so not there.
Let's see. Yeah, bring us back to where we were. Where that was. To the holy place sign is where we were.
That one.
There we go. I took this as a memory of the holy places that they would tell us, but I also thought it was just a little humorous. No smoking in holy places. I'm fine with that. Yeah, the tank top thing. No burgers in holy places.
Pork sandwich.
Right. I take it no food. Now, no dogs, but it doesn't say no cats. Interesting. Yeah. Cats were everywhere. Yeah. Israel is like the land of cats, and they're well taken care of, and they were just everywhere. I'm sure it means no pets. I like to know burgers is no food. I'm guessing it's no pets, but I playfully like to think that dogs. I won't even say it. I know many of you are dog owners, and I love other people's dogs, for the record. All right, I would think no guns, yeah, and we don't need cell phones going on. Anyway, thanks. Next one. Yeah, and here's just a quick shot of us with the valley behind. Yeah. It's funny, we had to remember to take pictures of us and, y'all and friends, because you can get back from a trip like this and you have a bunch of scenery pics, but then, no people, so we don't want to do that next. Okay, so then from Mount Carmel, where we were, we moved across the valley of Megiddo towards Nazareth. Next slide. And this is the modern day city of Nazareth. Jesus' hometown, if you will. Jesus of Nazareth, where he's from. But if you know your Gospels, you know that they did not receive him. He was thrown out even of his own town. Rob took us to a hill. Next slide. And this is, in Nazareth. And so as we sit here on top of this hill, the city that you just saw would have been to our backs. So down this hill, then the view would have been to the city that way. Out this way, down below, is just a sprawling valley there. And this is where, when Jesus spoke in such a way that those who heard him, the Jewish religious leaders, understood he was claiming to be one with the Father, and in fact was saying, I am. I am. That's God's name for himself. And they just were infuriated that he was blaspheming, and they intended to throw him off the cliff. Well, Chrissy caught me, next picture, walking over towards that cliff, because I was just curious for my own self, what would the perspective be? What was Jesus, what was the threat here, and as I walked over there and looked over the edge, next slide, that would have been where they'd have thrown him off, if they'd have had control over Jesus, which of course they did not. He gave up his life voluntarily in his time. It was never by the hands of men that Jesus' life was taken. It was only by his purpose and yieldedness to the Father, to the Father's time for him to be taken. But that perspective gave me goosebumps for a moment, just kind of being on that site with the inside of what was happening there and what they intended to do. Yeah. Next. From Nazareth, we moved on to the Sea of Galilee. And we spent a couple of 3 days in this area, and I loved it. I loved the whole region around the Sea of Galilee. Jesus was driven from Nazareth. He went then to Galilee, and Galilee became his headquarters for ministry, for most of his active ministry. So much of it around Capernaum, which is a town on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. Next slide. And if I'm talking fast, don't be afraid to ask questions or interrupt or say anything.
How long of a distance is it between those cities?
Yeah, good question. I wasn't, looking at the mileage, but it seemed like when we were in the bus, we were to the next place typically within an hour. Many of these places are a whole lot closer together than you think. Isreal, and especially this region that we're in and that we're covering, it's just not that big. I mean, you might, and this is, I'm spitballing, but if you were to take maybe from, Fredericksburg, hill country on up to Fort Worth-ish, that's about the region of, what we were traveling and seeing. So we're at the Sea of Galilee, like I said, and so peaceful, so serene. Just really, really loved it there. And it was easy for me to imagine Jesus being there and being with his disciples. They had us go out on the water, on a boat. Next slide. The boat on the right is the actual boat that we're getting on. And so some of our group, there were 31 of us total, wonderful group, are getting on. And we're getting ready to shove off. Next slide. And as we were out on the Sea of Galilee, they taught us traditional Jewish dances. Now, if this were a large projection, like, TV, and I had an Apple TV or whatever, I have a video of them dancing and singing, Allah, Nagiwa, Allah, they're doing the whole bit, and teach them how to do it. It was all kinds of fun, right?
Yeah. We did.
Yep, it was great. Just one of those surreal moments where, we're on the Sea of Galilee, dancing a Jewish jig. Really, really great. Next slide.
Is Galilee freshwater or saltwater?
Fresh. Yeah. Yeah, it's just I don't know where a lake ends and a sea begins, It's either a huge lake or a small sea, I would say. But yeah. So now, as I shared a bit Sunday, we are above the Sea of Galilee at the area where the Sermon on the Mount was preached, where Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount. And, as a kid, when I first heard about the Sermon on the Mount, I pictured a mountain. And as you can see, it's not a mountain, it's a hill, which is just fine. I guess Sermon on the Hill doesn't sound as powerful as Sermon on the Mount, but it's this hill overlooking the Sea of Galilee. And again, it was one of those moments where I just enjoyed pausing and standing there and taking it in. I've told John Sunday mornings as we're preaching through the Sermon on the Mount right now, hey, imagine being there. Imagine being right with Jesus as you're all seated. He's seated with you, and he begins to speak. And in this moment, I didn't have to imagine. I was there. It was just so much more real and tangible. Next slide. They have on that location the Church of the Beatitudes. This is a Catholic church that's been put on that site, and as is almost always the case, wherever there's a significant geographic location where something biblical happened, then often, because it's been 2,000 years in church history, either a Catholic church, usually, or an Orthodox church, or both, will have some kind of, church or a temple or situation there. So this is the Church of the Beatitudes. Interestingly, when you enter it, it's an octagonal interior. Next slide. Well, that's okay. Maybe I didn't put it in there, but the interior of the church is octagonal, and then each wall has a stained glass with one of the Beatitudes on it. So I thought that was pretty cool. But instead, you just have to settle for a picture of me there. Yes.
We were, I believe I remember being told that the reason there is something on all these sites is
kind of depends. I mean, if you're not in the occupied territories, then they wouldn't be able to do anything. And if it's a New Testament site, the Muslims wouldn't even recognize it anyway. They would just want to destroy it, if anything. Now, when you're in Jerusalem, of course, and when you're in occupied territories, our experience was interesting, and I'll say more about that when we're in Bethlehem, which is in occupied territory, interestingly. There were places where we couldn't go. There were places where we could go, but Jews couldn't go. Like our Jewish tour guides sometimes can't get into Bethlehem. In fact, hadn't been able to get into Bethlehem for years, and she didn't even know until the day we went that she was allowed to go this time. So maybe because of COVID in 2 years, and they're poor economically, their doors are more open. They're trying to catch up economically, I don't know. But again, I'll say more about that when we get there. Next slide. Okay, this is the ruins. Now, one neat thing is Rob would take us to places that not every tour group went. A lot of times when we pulled in the parking lots, right, of a lot of these sites, it was like being at Disneyland. I mean, it was just bus, 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 bus. We got to this site, I think we were the only bus.
It was great.
Right, that's right. This is the ruins of the city of Chorazin, which is also located right there on the Sea of Galilee. And you may remember from your New Testament that Jesus cursed Chorazin, along with a few other cities. Woe to you, Chorazin. And in fact, in his cursing of Chorazin for their disbelief and for their idolatry and their lack of faithfulness to God, essentially he said, may you never be inhabited ever again. And to this day, Chorazin has never, ever, ever been inhabited since, just after the time of Christ. The charred remains of a city that, is being restored a little bit as a ruin. It was just a pile of rocks with some remains of walls. So even something like this, that's not how it was found, 30 years ago. The archaeologists are setting it up a little bit to at least show you how some of the houses would have been laid out. Most of it looks more like this next slide. Yeah. And it was profound, again, maybe it's not as famous of a biblical tourist site as some others, but I think Rob was really wise to take us to places like this. Because, again, it just shows how what Jesus said, really happened and is really true. Chorazin to this day is a ruin and it's uninhabited, and nobody's developing it. Yeah. Next. All right. Yeah.
That's such a mistake.
So why did I take this? This little critter popped his head out in Chorazin as we were walking around. I said it's uninhabited. Well, it's uninhabited by people. Some of you, do you remember a few months ago, I preached a sermon from a verse in Proverbs. It was this summer. Remember, I kind of preached some of my favorite verses. And the Proverbs said 4 things on the earth are small but wise. And the first one were ants. And there were locusts, right? And then the third one in the version of the Bible I read was called a rock badger. Okay. And I remember I mentioned, now depending on your translation, it might say something different. It might say rabbit. It might say hyrax, H-Y-R-A-X. And that is the Hebrew name for that little guy right there. Okay, which is what he actually is. He's a hyrax. If the New Living Translation were to say hyrax, we really wouldn't know what they were talking about. So that's why it reads rock badger. Not an animal we have, but there he is. And now I'm really going to quiz you. It's okay if nobody remembers. In Proverbs, we were to learn something from each of these 4 little creatures who were small yet wise. Why is the hyrax wise? Do you remember?
Probably lived in high places.
Interesting. It lives in high places, specifically on rocky ground, in crags, among the rocks, which could not necessarily be high, often high, but here he found crags and rocks to live in. Why does he do that? Because they have no defense. He's a defenseless animal. A couple of fangs there, but can't do a lot of damage with him apparently. He's easy prey, the Hyrax. So their way of defending themselves is the refuge of the rock. And what a wonderful spiritual analogy for us. We're not as strong as we think we are. Amen? And we need the refuge of the rock. Right? Just like that little furry critter.
How big is that little guy?
Yeah, how big is he? Well, have you ever seen a marmot?
Yeah.
He's about like a marmot.
Oh, okay. Bigger than a cat. Okay.
Yeah, like super big, bigger than a prairie dog. If you halfway between a beaver and a prairie dog, how's that? All right, next. So from now we stayed in Galilee for a few days, but we were very close to the Golan Heights, and this is the northernmost extension of Israel. The Muslims would love to have this. Many countries would love to have the Golan Heights. They've been contested. Israel fiercely holds on to and will never let go of the Golan Heights. The reason why they will never let go of the Golan Heights is because, as our tour guide told us very clearly, strategically, that is how invading armies have always entered Israel from the north. Be it Syria, Assyria, Lebanon, any antagonistic country seeking to invade, that's their way in, is the Golan Heights. So from there they can defend their country and they won't give it up. Next slide. Here's Chrissy in a bunker. They won their independence in 1948. That was their, war for independence. And to this day, now you can go up there and you can see the fortifications and the bunkers. And she's looking out across a valley that's, Israeli agricultural land, but just beyond that is Syria. Very, very close to the border of Syria there. Next slide. Yeah, that kind of shows it. So, more or less, here is the boundary of Israel, and then that's Syria. You can see Syria right there. So with them being so close, you can see why this high ground is so important to them.
So were there still soldiers or anybody there?
That bunker was old. That bunker was not used now. It was just a relic for, like a museum for us to visit.
Yes.
Okay.
But to answer your question, there were soldiers everywhere. They have a military presence all over the place. And it's not like anything to be fearful of. We're not used to that. We're not used to our soldiers being all over the place with, AK-47s or whatever it is. But for them, that's, completely normal. Yes. And some of you may know, some of you may not. Military service in Israel is compulsory. Every male and female serves in the army for 2 years. Usually at the age of 18, some 17, but at least 2 years. 2 years is the requirement of service. And in fact, one evening when we were in Jerusalem, we didn't know this was going to happen, but when we went inside the old city near the Western Wall, it was like grad night for the academy. They welcomed in an entire new class they were commissioned. And it was a celebration. There was so much joy there that night. And I couldn't help but think, they're so happy and proud and thrilled to serve their country. It's palpable, you could see it. And it kind of made me wish, as a short aside, in a way, that we had that. I think possibly there'd be a greater widespread respect for our military if everyone served, And that doesn't mean that everyone who serves is on the front lines or anything. There's lots of different ways to serve. But yeah, it's part of who they are. And it makes sense because Israel, that small country, that small nation, has been under fire more than any nation on the planet, from the get-go. So, next slide. Yeah. Just more of a perspective of the bunkers there. Next one. From there, we went up, we're still in the Golan Heights. We went to we're probably driving half an hour, not too far, to the area of Dan. We're going to find the ruins of this ancient city of Dan, which was a Canaanite city before the Israelites conquered it, when they came in. And I took this picture just to show that, we did lots of walking, and the walking wasn't like, paved roads and sidewalks everywhere. It was cobblestones and, tricky footing at times, and it was a physically, I would say, challenging trip. So if you've never been and want to go, I can't encourage you enough to go. I would say start walking months before you go, get in pretty good shape. And, Rob had his watch on. He counts his steps every day. He's like, I got to do 10,000 steps a day. I think we were averaging easily 14,000, 15,000 steps a day with all the walking that
Some
we're
were
doing.
20.
Yeah, sometimes that many.
Well, we had one free day
Right.
where you could do whatever you wanted, so that one day we didn't walk.
We might have had 5,000 that day.
So how many steps you go that day?
Yeah.
That's jungly looking.
It was very lush in this area, and you can see why it was, preferred. There was a lot of fresh water going through there. Next slide. And again, as he just always did, he's taken that opportunity to teach us. There at the ruins of the ancient city of Dan. That's probably the northernmost city in the divided kingdom, right? Because in the divided kingdom, Judah to the south, 10 tribes, Israel to the north, 2 tribes. And you may remember our chart from a few weeks ago where I split the kings of the southern, kingdom and the northern kingdom. And remember, Judah, the kings were like bad, bad, good, bad, good, bad, bad, good. And remember, the northern kingdom was just bad, 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 bad,
All
bad.
bad.
So they were captured by Assyria 150 years before Judah was taken captive. It's a shame that both were taken captive because ultimately both were not faithful to the Lord. But Judah lasted longer because they had seasons of revival. Next, we from the Golan Heights returned back to where we were at the Sea of Galilee, and now we're entering Capernaum, as it says, the town of Jesus. That's Lisa going in right there. Next slide. And here we are. That is the church of, what's the word they used? The primacy?
Primacy.
Yeah. Again, a Catholic church, church primacy. But the reason that church is there, and the reason this site is significant, is because this is the place, plus or minus an acre or two, on the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus restores Peter. Remember, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And how crushing that would have been for him, to have known that he denied his Lord. Well, Jesus, loving Peter, restored him and asked him 3 times when he came in from the water. Remember, they're out there fishing. They see a guy on the shore, and then they realize it's Jesus. He calls to them, and he's been cooking fish the whole time, and says, hey, come on over, I got some breakfast for you. And they're having breakfast together there on the shore. This is the resurrected Jesus, of course, now during those 40 days. And specifically for Peter, he looks him in the eye. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Tend my lambs. He asked him 3 times, do you love me? You'll see just over Rob's shoulder a little bit of a monument there. Next slide. So that's kind of a nice little, what do we call it, statue or really cool yard art, or what do you call it? But just a beautiful, I thought, monument to Jesus restoring Peter. And of course, there it is, Sea of Galilee, just right on the edge of it. Yeah. Next slide. We had to go down there, and I just had to put my hand in the water, grabbed a little pebble from the Sea of Galilee. That's one of our souvenirs, just a small one, Probably not the first person to do that. Yeah. Figure that's a souvenir I can't buy in a shop, A little piece of the Sea of Galilee. Next. Jim and Lisa there with us as well. Next. Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
Don't you just want to hang out there? Yeah. And I get that our Creator, you know, loved creation. I mean, as it was and is because of our sin, it's still His, and we still find, you know, moments of beauty. And yeah, I love to see a galley. I could have stayed there another couple days and just sat there and, you know, had my Bible open and read and pondered, and loved that. It's beautiful, so calm. Next. All right, well, sooner or later we had to move on, and we did. And we headed south now to a place called Bet Shan. Bet Shan biblically is significant, interestingly, because this is where the Philistines impaled Saul to the wall, where Saul and Jonathan were killed. And David mourns not only Jonathan, his best friend, but he mourns Saul, which is amazing, right? Because Saul spent years trying to kill David. And David had a chance to kill Saul. He found him in a cave, asleep, but he didn't take his life because he wasn't going to lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. He knew that God is the one who establishes kings, and so it would be for the Lord to decide when his time was up. And when Saul's life was taken by the Philistines, again, you expect David to mourn Jonathan, Saul's son, his close friend, the fierce love they had for each other. But for him to mourn Saul as well, it's pretty incredible. That convicts me. Next slide. So here we are, and probably, I think, the most impressive Roman ruins in many ways were at this Bet Shan, this city. This would have been kind of the main thoroughfare, right there. That's Highway 29. Next. Yeah. Found a couple tourists there.
They're lost.
The weather, as you can see, was just awesome. It was like, couldn't have been better. It was so good. Usually in the 70s and sunny. Good time to go. Next. Hutch and me. And yeah, the ruins there, as they've excavated them, just fascinating. The Romans were great builders. You know, think about it. The Texas Rangers got a ballpark in the 90s, I think, and they don't play it in anymore. You know? Think about that. I mean, that thing must have cost, I don't know, hundreds of millions anyway, and now they got a new ballpark because their old one's no good. We build, stadiums are our cathedrals in a way, culturally, when you think about it. They built stuff to last. Really, really impressive. Next slide. Like this. That's the amphitheater in Bet Shan. And one of the men with us on our team was a retired pastor.
Oh, no.
Remember him? Yeah, Randy. And Randy's sort of, you wouldn't have known it. I wouldn't have known it because he's a humble guy. But he's like an opera singer. He has an opera singer quality voice.
Amazing power that he has.
So much so. And at Rob's prodding, he had to ask him about 3 times. Finally, Randy went down and stood here. No PA system, no microphone, no nothing. And he sang out a couple of verses of, I don't even remember listening to the words. I just remember the sound and going, are you kidding me? That is amazing. You know.
So y'all were at the top and could hear him real well
Oh, yeah.
down there.
Yeah. You could have heard him here, you could have heard him there, you could have heard him there, you could have heard him all around. And
That's so cool.
just the design, you know, acoustically of those amphitheaters, it was on full display. Rob knew Randy could do that, and so he prodded him a little bit in this humble, old, retired pastor went ahead, and we're also glad he did.
The old guy walk all the way. I'm hoping you had somebody carrying that.
Well, here's the easy route right there, so he might have done that, you know, but pretty cool. Next slide. I like to joke that Hutch was leaning on one of the pillars. You know, he's stronger than he knew. All right, next. It's kind of your Samson moment there, I think. Okay, so from Bet Shan, we went just a little bit further south now, and notice we are on the Jordan River. Okay, the Jordan River is the boundary, natural boundary between Israel and what? Jordan, to the east, right? So that time here at the Jordan River was special because, next slide, folks who wanted to could be baptized in the Jordan. And Rob said, hey, even if you've been baptized, you know, maybe growing up in church, or maybe as an adult when you came to faith, it's okay. We can have this experience. You can call it a rededication, you know, if you'd like to do it. So lots of people did it. As you can see, this is the before picture. Next. This is the during picture. I love that. Rob, of course, Pastor Rob, and then we had another pastor with us. His name's Justin Christopher. I knew Justin, and I've known him for years. I knew him when he was a campus pastor at the University of Texas, and I was ministering to college students around about the year 2000, 2001, 2002, from there. So he and I would do ministry. I would join, really, with the ministry that he was doing on the UT campus. And hadn't seen him in years, so it was just wonderful that he and his wife Brenda happened to be on the trip, so it was like a reunion for us. Really cool. Next. Jim and Lisa before, right? All ready to go in. And you can see, by the way, the Jordan's not that wide, and it's kind of muddy, nothing glorious. And that's Jordan right there. So the boundary, if you will, between the two countries is the river. And anybody we saw on that side were Jordanian. Just, you know, as close as can be. Next slide. Here they are coming up.
I didn't realize the river wasn't flowing, that you could, it was.
It wasn't moving much, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Well, we didn't want you all to float away. Right, that's good. Next slide. There's hardly a time where Rob isn't smiling. Like, he could be paying taxes and he'd be smiling. I don't know how the guy does it. It's crazy. Next slide.
So y'all didn't get baptized in the river?
I was often the photographer for things.
You could have left a girl with a camera on.
Good. Next. I love this. I'm glad, actually, Rob, that you would ask. Rob and Chris, Rob had a scheduled meeting, says, hey, Kim, I need help baptizing people. I said, well, tell you what, why don't you have Justin help, and I'll get a picture of everybody. He said, great. I did not know that the last person who was scheduled to be baptized was Justin's wife. So it was wonderful that Justin got to be involved in his wife's baptism. Yeah, it's Brenda. And I told Rob, use that picture on your next brochure.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that he will in some way make it. It just, there aren't even words for that pic. I mean, it just says it all, doesn't it?
But she's not tall, she just exploded out of the water.
That's right, yeah, absolutely. That's very true. It's so cool. I love the joy. Next. I took this picture, as I mentioned earlier, just to say wherever we went, just about, that's what was going on. And we found out that, yes, it is good to have a good tour guide. Absolutely undeniable. But it's probably even better to have a good bus driver.
Oh, yeah.
bus driver's name was Avi, and we would sing his praises left, right, and sideways because he got us through jams that I don't know how he did. There were times where people sitting on the sides of the bus couldn't look out the window. You know, like that close to stuff that was going on.
Continually.
Yeah. Even one time where it was like a pair of like a forklift or something. There was a truck that had forks, and the forks went like this. Thought they were going to go right through the glass of the bus, but he just maneuvered just deftly around them, and it was all good. Yeah.
Did your bus look like that?
Yes.
How'd you find it among all others? Just like
Great question. I should have taken a picture of our bus, but it had a big, you would call it a bra, yeah, like Rob's AGA, Awesome Global Ambassador insignia was on a big display on the front of it. And then there was a little deal right here that had our group name as well. So just had to pay close attention. Not hard to find. Next. Took this just to show, as we're venturing out now, that even in arid places, there's agriculture. And there's huge groves of date palms all over the place. They grow citrus, avocados, probably more dates than anything. Bananas, yeah, that's right. Tons of bananas. I'm not a fan of dates, but if you are, Israel's your place. They grow. All right, next. This is the Dead Sea. Someone was asking, I don't know, was it Dean, about our hotel and where we were. So that's the view from the balcony of our hotel at the Dead Sea. This hotel, it was like a resort. We didn't feel like we were roughing it here. It was absolutely beautiful, and in fact, that is a resort. You know, people go there to the Dead Sea to vacation. It's like a spa, you know, almost kind of environment.
Is the Dead Sea kind of like, you know, the Great Salt Lake, where it's really dead? There's nothing going to live in it.
Yeah, that's right, and it is in fact receding gradually. The salt content, as you may know, is so high that people just literally float in it.
We did.
Yeah. How long did you float? 10 minutes or so?
Well, like
You said you couldn't
she
stay too long.
said, Kari said, you really don't want to be in it more than 20 minutes, so we listened. Got out at 20.
Yeah.
But you're floating and you can't stand up.
No.
I mean,
Very hard.
your legs are up in the air. Just slowly figured out how to do it, but
Pretty crazy.
really weird.
All right. Leaving the Dead Sea, we move on. And next slide. Actually, can you go back one? I want to point out something on the map. Thank you. Okay. Notice here that says Negev. So where we're going to be now is in the Negev desert. This area is desolate. Just really, really desolate. And you'll see the next place we go is Masada. Some of you, if you've been there, you know about Masada. If you haven't, you may know the history of Masada. Go ahead, next slide. This was where, it's like it's their Alamo and then some. In 70 AD, it was the last bastion of Jews who resisted Roman rule. And, you know, Nero ultimately burns Jerusalem, is arresting, imprisoning, torturing Christians, enslaving them. And at this high fortress, a regimen of Jews, if you will, fight to the death and ultimately decide to take their own lives rather than be conquered by the Romans and enslaved. It's quite a story. We took the cable car up there because we didn't want to walk this snaky trail all the way up the mountain. Had we done that, that would have been all we did that day, I think. So it's like, hey, we will pay the $5, $10, whatever it is, we'll do the train. Next slide. That's nearing the top now. Next slide. And now we're on top of Masada. And that's looking down. I mean, we were on that, you know, valley floor, if you will. Now we're high above. Next slide. It's just to kind of give you an impression of the ruins, how well preserved they are, and the perspective up there. Next slide.
How did they attack that?
Great question. Ultimately, the Romans created, Chrissy, you can help me, you guys can help me with this, a ramp,
With
Yeah.
a battery.
a battering ram. They had numbers, they had, technology. The small regiment of brave Jewish soldiers would hurl rocks down at them. So then the Romans brought Jewish slaves and put them at the front of the workforce so that the Jewish soldiers on top wouldn't drop rocks on their own people, if you follow me.
Didn't it take something like 2 years to build a ramp?
It took a while, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a siege. It was a long siege.
Well,
They had food stored up there that could hold them for years, but yeah, after that long siege, they did.
no, I was just gonna say that they had all that food, that, they didn't have to worry about going hungry.
Right.
Because when, before they came, none of that food had been used.
Well, and it was one of Herod's outposts.
You know.
Herod built it to be a place of refuge for him. He just hardly ever used it. But he was so extravagant that in all that he built up there, he also built a storehouse of food that was never eaten, that lasted. And when the Jews went there for refuge, they were set. They had what they needed.
Where'd they get water?
Yeah, there were, there were springs in the desert, there were sources, they would bring it up from down below, and it's amazing, the amount of work involved to do that. But they also had what they called cisterns and collection areas that they could store it up there. Next slide. This gentleman is a scribe, and he was there on top in Masada, doing what scribes do, copying the Torah. And I zoomed in a little bit, next slide, just so you can see that's a skill and an art form, I think. It's amazing. It's like a computer font coming out of his hand in Hebrew. Jim and Lisa, when Jim got to where he was seeing him, he looked up and he said, hello. And he spoke with Jim, and he said, what's your wife's name? Jim said, Lisa. So he took a piece of paper that he was using, wrote Jim and Lisa in Hebrew, had a couple of hearts on it artistically, and handed it to him. So that's a nice little keepsake they have. Very cool. Next slide. These are folks excavating mosaics there. There's still stuff there unearthing, and you find throughout the region ancient tile mosaics. And they're doing this meticulous work of unearthing and preserving those. Next slide. I just like that picture. I like it a lot. Yeah. Next slide. On our way back down, again, not going to walk that little snaky trail that these folks are. And we're going all the way down to where that red light is. Yeah. Next
Sure.
slide. Yeah.
Tell them about that, go back one.
Okay, go back one. Yes.
See that square of stone?
Yes, right
That was
here.
the encampment of the Roman soldiers
That's right.
to protect them from the Israelis that might raid them.
That's
And
right.
they had those stacks all around there.
Yeah, that was their
They're like
fort.
4 or 5 foot high.
That was the Roman fort, the ruins of which exist, as you said, Mike, can be seen to this day in front of the top of Masada. Pretty amazing. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Next. We are at En-Gedi, right? And this is where David found Saul in one of these caves, sleeping. Could have taken his life, didn't, cut off a piece of his robe. Saul was always out to kill David, threatened by him, and he's half insane. David, from a distance, shouts at Saul and said, I have no ill will against you. I don't mean to kill you. Look, I've got a piece of your robe. I could have taken your life in the cave, and I didn't. You wouldn't lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. And Saul, in that moment, was convicted, knew he'd been better, knew Saul was the better man, but of course, didn't mend his ways. There's a pool there at En-Gedi, next slide. It's fed by a natural waterfall and spring. And Chrissy and Lisa are getting their toes wet there. The water's so clear you almost don't even know the water's there. Great, next slide. This is then a little bit further into the Negev. We're at the area of Qumran. And the caves of Qumran were where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This cave, they told us in particular, was the first and main cave where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And the short story was in 1940, was it 9?
I was gonna say 7, 8, or 9.
Yeah, right around 48. A kid, a shepherd, out there with his flock, and one of them gets away, and he's throwing a rock to flush it out of the cave, and the rock hits something hard, chink, breaks like a clay jar, which raises the kid's curiosity, and then he let, his elders know, I think there's something in there, and sure enough, they went up now interested in what it might be, and we have the treasure and the legacy today of the Dead Sea Scrolls because in God's providence, a shepherd threw a rock in a cave. Just amazing, right? And I'll show you one of those scrolls in a little while. Next slide. As the day ends, we're moving on again. Next slide. Now to Jerusalem. It's 8:20.
No.
And I knew I was going to be
7:20.
challenged.
7:20.
7:20, thank you. Okay, good. That would have been really late. 7:20. Okay. If I can get us done by 7:40, can we go 10 minutes later? Is that all right? Yeah, I won't go too late. So if I can get us done by 7:40, great. If not, then we'll do an appendage next week. But Jerusalem, next. There you go. This was not what it looked like the day we arrived. The day we arrived, it was very hazy. The wind was coming in from the east, so all the dust and smoke and everything was blowing in the air. But I decided to show you the picture that we took a couple of days later because it's a lot better. And the view from the Mount of Olives, where we are right now, where Jesus entered, during Passion Week on that donkey, as he made his way toward the city. That final week of his life, and the events that culminated on the cross, he would have come down the Mount of Olives and had that perspective that we have right there. Would have looked a little different, of course. But, that's looking across. Next slide. And there's our group. You can see Rob, myself, Jim, Lisa, Chrissy. There's Hutch. There's Roxa. Next slide. Now we're all the way across. You can see the Dome of the Rock from a distance in the picture. Now we're actually in the old city there and getting another group picture with the Dome of the Rock right behind it. Feel free to chip in anything. I know I'm talking a little fast, but...
Can you go in there?
No,
Next slide.
Not even the outer part of it?
not that we knew.
What did you ask, if y'all could go in?
Yeah.
Next slide.
One
Western
one
Wall.
little other thing that I thought was interesting, very minor. Inside our hotel in Jordan, not Israel, was up on the wall in the corner, a sticker, like a little circle, and it had an arrow and Mecca buildings. And so it was pointing to the way that you face to pray. Which I thought was very interesting.
Well, were you in Muslim territory
Well,
for that?
in Jordan, when we
Okay.
were there,
Oh.
yeah, and so that, the faithful Muslims, pray
Yeah.
5 times a day facing Mecca.
Yeah.
And you gotta, if you're in a hotel, you gotta know which way Mecca is, so they have like a little compass with an arrow.
And they
pointing
would
you
call to prayer like early in the morning.
Yeah, their 5 a.m. Muslim
Yeah.
rooster call would go out, and it was the call to prayer. We're sound asleep 5 a.m. and they beam it out of loudspeakers. It's a Muslim chant, that it's just makes
Gave
you
me a
sit
heart
straight
attack.
up out of bed. Mercifully, after about a minute, it ends. And then about 9 minutes later,
Starts again.
hit again. Chrissy's like, oh great, the snooze button. The first one's a call to prayer, we learned. The second one is the actual prayer. So that's why there's the delay.
And then you get the garbage trucks.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, to us it was an intrusion, but to them it's their life. Next slide.
The wall is divided, about 2/3 men area and 1/3 women area. Of course, you can't cross the wall, you have to stay on your own side.
Yeah, the women's area is further over to the right, and there's a divider in between. Next slide. This is the Garden of Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives. You can see the olive trees, you know.
And it was olive season.
Yeah.
Our guide said that they were getting 2 days off school, the kids, to be with their families to go harvest olives. It's like a holiday,
Right.
long weekend.
Next slide. Wherever, again, there's something of significance, somebody builds a church over it. So where there was the Garden of Gethsemane, you had the church, the garden. Inside the church, you know, it's as grand on the outside as it is on the inside. Next slide. Largely Byzantine architecture there. But pretty awesome, you know. When I'm inside a place like that, you don't say much. You just sort of take it in. Sort of ominous, beautiful, formal, scary, all those things at once, you know. I wouldn't use the word warm, you know, but impressive, certainly. Next slide. Back out into the garden. Just amazing, right? Imagining this is where Jesus was on the night he was betrayed. Right there. Next slide. It's an incredible city. Next slide. I'm taking you around the walls a bit here. Next slide. Here's Chrissy and our group. We're getting ready to enter what they told us was the room of the Last Supper. The truth is, it's agreed that this is the site where the upper room was. But the room that we went into, there's no way on the planet this was the upper room because it looked like this. Next slide. That's like 5th, 6th century Byzantine architecture. You know, there's no way that was the humble upper room of Jesus and the disciples. But built upon the site,
Supposedly.
you know, more than likely, certainly, where that upper room was.
Is that another Catholic church?
Yes.
Next slide. You know, part of what we saw just as we were in Jerusalem was the you know, Jewish rabbis and you know, they were just everywhere. You know, the students, the teachers, the sort of ultra-Orthodox, everywhere, praying. You know, they're so devout, and they're just, you know, they're not really fazed by tourists. They're going about their business. Next slide. Rob didn't mind interrupting their business to make friends.
He's not smiling there.
But no, he's asking them about themselves and what they're reading, what they're copying, what they're doing, and they were friendly enough to talk to him and let him know. And he just has a disarming way about him where he can pretty much get anybody to get with him, which is a gift for sure. Yeah. Next slide. Told you it's the land of cats. I could have taken, you know, 50 pictures of cats. I took one, but they were everywhere.
I had to sneak that
They're
one
well
in.
taken care of. Next slide. Yeah.
They welcome the cats
Yeah.
in Israel because it keeps the rat population down.
Oh.
Well, didn't they at one time try to get rid of them, and then
The
the
rats got really
population
bad.
just went nuts, and they realized that was a mistake, so they
Right.
brought them back. But they clipped their ears.
Yeah.
Because 'cause they fix them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, they'll, any cat that doesn't have a, little snip out of his ear, they get up and take them in and fix them. Yeah.
Hey, I know it's like only 10 minutes left, but out of curiosity, I don't know, Wayne, is there a way this light can come off, or if you kill this one, does it kill all of them? I should
give it a shot.
anything. Sweet. All right, good. That's good. This picture made me want to do that because now we're in underground caves, which are in and around Jerusalem and just outside of the ancient walls. And I thought I would get the jeebies in these caves. I didn't because the ceiling was high enough. There were very few times I had to stoop. But the perspectives were really something else. Next slide, as you can see. A lot of times these were built as channels for water, to get water from outside the city into the city. Next slide. Here's Jim and Lisa emerging from the caves. They're at the exit, but that shows you, the scope of it a bit. Next slide. This was after our first burger in about 10 days.
They had McDonald's there.
That's why we're all smiling. It was a good burger too.
They're huge.
Yeah, great. That's right. So we're feeling revived.
We just couldn't get cheese.
Next slide. I told you military was everywhere, and I told you they're young, and they're very approachable. I mean, obviously respectful, but they don't mind. They love Americans. Israel loves our country. That we are their ally, and may we always be their ally. And they know it. So they love Americans. Next slide. We did go into Bethlehem, which is Muslim-occupied territory. But they are smart enough to open it to tourists and make money. Next slide. When you go into Bethlehem, you see this, the crescent, and it's so different when you're in occupied territories and Muslim areas. They're trashier. I mean, like, they're not clean. There's just garbage and trash everywhere. It's a little more chaotic. It's less organized. You go from almost what feels like a European environment, part of Jerusalem, to a near third world country feel of something. It's striking. Next slide. As you go into the occupied territories, there's security wall that you pass and security checkpoints. And it was easier, actually. It's interesting. It was easier to get into the occupied territory than to get out. The Jews were much more checking us out security-wise than the Muslims were coming in because they're poor and they need money. Next slide. This is modern-day Bethlehem. And we're on a hill, very much like what David would have been on as he was tending his sheep. Next slide. Rob there teaching us, as he did everywhere in Bethlehem. Next slide. Next slide. The Church of the Nativity, if I'm remembering right, they're in Bethlehem. Yeah, just as ornate as it could be. Again, dating back to about the 6th century.
So that church is over the cave where Jesus was supposedly born. They built this giant church over it. And we stood in a long line to go into the cave, but our line barely budged, so we left after about an hour.
We had another place we needed to be, too.
What?
We had another place we needed to be before we could go.
And it wasn't that important to us to kiss a rock, truth be told. Some of the Catholics will do as well. But very impressive. Next slide.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
What was that? Was that on a wall somewhere?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah. Inside the Church of the Nativity, on all the side walls were beautiful, paintings. Next slide. And again. In Bethlehem, in Muslim territory, they don't have Starbucks, but they want our money. So you have square bucks and you have stars and bucks. We just thought that was hilarious. pretty good. Next. As we were going now back into, away from occupied territory, out of Bethlehem, as we're going through the, Jewish checkpoint to get back into Jerusalem, here's a Israeli soldier. Again, firearm right there, but you can see he's smiling. They're friendly. They're just doing their job. We're not used to being on a Greyhound bus and having a soldier with a, big old gun come on, but they will protect their country.
Do the citizens carry guns there?
Citizens?
Yeah.
Not that I saw. No. Just military everywhere.
Even ex-soldiers?
I didn't see that. I didn't see open carry. Yeah. Next. Holocaust Museum. That would be worth going to Jerusalem all by itself. Just stunning. So we didn't have enough time. They gave us, I think, an hour and a half, and our tour guide had to come and pull me out because I was only halfway through it, and I was going fast and skipping stuff. And you can't take pictures inside the museum, so you won't see any. But next slide. That's our tour guide. I wanted to show you a picture of her, Kari. Jewish lady, lives in Jerusalem. Her parents survived the Holocaust. It was traumatic for them, as you can imagine. And she was very progressively open with us about her family and her experience, and we just grew to love her. Felt like we made a friend. Hope to see her again someday. Sweet, sweet lady. Next slide. So, couldn't take pictures inside, but outside the Holocaust Museum, people planted like trees of remembrance in a remembrance garden. And this one, you can see who planted it, and that was their monument. Oscar and Schindler. When I saw that, I just, something, oh my goodness, you stumble upon something and you can't believe what you're seeing. Next slide. Next. So remember I showed you Qumran in that cave where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, right? So there is a, if you will, what would you call it? A museum or a shrine or a place very specially set aside. It is shaped like a giant clay jar, and we're inside of it. So this is like the inside and the opening, the top of a giant clay jar that we're in. The building is shaped that way. And this is a scroll, that has been let down through that hole in the clay jar. And this right here is the entire book of Isaiah from before 100 BC. Next slide. You walk right up to it and see it. So that was a massive moment for me. I didn't need to see all the Dead Sea Scrolls. I just hoped to see one of them. And praise God, we didn't just see one. We saw they have the whole book of Isaiah there preserved. Isn't that amazing? Dating, more or less back to about 150 BC. And as they compare it to our scriptures today, it all lines up. It all lines up. Our Bible is reliable. Love it. Love it. Next slide. This was a fascinating, huge scale model of Jerusalem. You can see the size of it by these folks over here, and that's just a teeny part of it. Next slide. I wasn't going to show, the whole thing, you can't, but this is the second of two slides of this. That's, of course, the temple, and gives you a sense of the scope and the grandeur of it, and its importance and eminence compared to the whole rest of the city at the time. Really impressive and fascinating. Next slide. This is moving towards the end of our time in Jerusalem. This is the pool of Bethesda, right below there. Right? You remember the story where they would wait for the waters to be, and the first one in, the superstition was that they'd be healed, that they felt an angel would stir the water. So we're right above the ruins of the pool of Bethesda there. And Rob, next slide, of course, is using that opportunity to share the scripture and teach us. Really something to be right there where it all happened. Next slide. Walking the Via Dolorosa, the way of Christ as he carried his cross through the city. Next slide.
Where are the people?
Well, they were all over the place. I got just very blessed, and there was a moment where there was nobody in the frame, and I went, wham, I'm getting it. Next slide.
Otherwise, it was packed.
Yeah.
We ultimately, a real highlight at the end was to come to the garden tomb. Next slide. To go into the garden tomb was really a surreal experience, right? I know a few of you have done that. Just how many have done that? Yeah, a few of you have, yeah. That's a moment you don't forget.
Where was he laid out there?
They think this the middle right there, because the reason I've come in through the entrance this way, and the reason they think it was there is because and when you read the account, the women can see right away that the body's not there. If it were around the corner, you would have had to go in and then go like this. They had a way of explaining it but they felt it was right in the middle where he was laid. Next slide. And I think I showed you that picture last Sunday. But, like I said then, the tomb's still empty. Praise God. Next slide. Yeah. Beautiful. Next slide. We used our day off largely to catch our breath and go to this huge outdoor market, which we really enjoyed. Next slide.
Oh,
Yeah. Amazing stuff, right? Yeah. Next slide.
That's baklava.
Oh.
Yeah.
All different flavors.
This guy's like the Da Vinci of baklava. Even to where he's making a coliseum or an amphitheater out of his baklava. Yeah. Next slide. As we went through, I noticed in particular this market was unique because it's where all of the rabbis and the Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Jews they all went to this one market. So that must have been kosher, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it was owned by, their brother. I don't know. But they just all went to that one, which I thought was very interesting. Next slide. Yeah. Those tourists, we just kept running into them.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
Yeah. That was a really cool place. We hung out there for a bit, made friends with the guy behind the bar, and, we thought he was from Texas. He was like, his English was so good. Made a friend, yeah. Next slide. Shocker, Rob's smiling again.
What's in his
But he's got ice cream, so he's extra happy. Yeah. Didn't share one with us, but yeah. Next slide. All right, I want to be good to my word. I said 8:40. I'll save Petra for next week, and that'll just be about a 5 to 10 minute bit. So that's a carrot for next week. Petra will be a little thing we'll do next week. Thank you for letting me. That takes us through the Israel part of it. And I hope, did you enjoy that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for going with me. I've sat through boring slideshows before, and I was trying to balance this, how much to show, how much not to show, what stories to tell, what stories not to tell. But yeah, I hope you did enjoy that. And, we felt like you were with us in a way, even everywhere we went.
I wish, as a church and family, that we could load up and go.
Yeah.
They'd have to beam me up. I'm not riding that plane again.
Oh, yeah.
Well, take ship, take a cruise there and back. And, but it was, it would have been great to have all those together.
If there's a way we could just do this, Yeah.
Well, we can move them out.
That's right. That's right. Amen. Amen. Yeah. Good. Well, hey, thank you. That was just really, it means a lot to me to have the chance to share that with you all. And I know a lot of you were asking if we would do that, so thank you for asking. Let's close in prayer and safe travels. Lord, thank you for tonight. Thank you that we're together. And It's inspiring, God, to just see that it's all true. You are who you say you are, and our Bibles are reliable. We don't have a religion of made-up stories and myths. Far from it, Lord. We have a reasonable faith in you, in your word, and in an ongoing reality of our relationship with you and with one another. Thank you, Lord, for what you have been doing over the last century, that Israel is a nation again. We pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We pray that you would continue to watch over your people, Lord. You made of them a nation for yourself. And I know that your commitment, your covenant goes on. You are faithful even when they and when we, to be honest, are at times faithless. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for your faithfulness. And may we, Lord, as a nation, I pray, continue to lift up, pray for, and support Israel. We lift them up to you. Thank you for this time, God. Thank you for what we've been able to share together. I pray now that you would go with my brothers and sisters, hold them close, be with them safely, and bring us back together on Sunday. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thanks.